Hi,
Hi,
Amigas.
Amigas.
How's
Hi,
everybody?
everyone.
Good. How's everyone doing?
Good. So
Happy to be
excited
here.
for this new podcast.
Yes.
I know we got a new setup.
Yeah.
It's a really cool setup. We got microphones and like table attachments for those that are in, podcast, not seeing us on YouTube.
Yeah, so
It's
if you're
really
seeing
cool.
us on
Looks
YouTube,
legit.
this is our new setup.
We look like we're about to start singing,
Little
Como la
concert for you guys.
with the microphones.
But
it's
yeah,
cool.
so we got a
Stepping
new
up.
setup because our guys, obviously we don't do all of our editing and all of that. My son helps, our friend Beto helps.
Yes.
So this was a suggestion, so we're going with it. Right.
Yes.
All right, so how's everyone doing with the reading?
Doing good. It's been a little bit hard to get back into a schedule how I used to before, and I don't know if it's because of the pandemic or whatever, but it's been a little hard to get back on it. Like, I'm just like, okay, I haven't read. I need to catch up. I need to know.
Yeah.
Like, I'll see some posts, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm not there yet. Let me just get back on it. So, yeah, it's hard.
I know I struggled just to understand and like kind of. Yeah, I was struggling. It's so much information. I even told Jess, I'm like, dude, like history is not my ish, and that's part of why I'm like, okay, I need to get with it.
Mhm.
And Jess did recommend the Netflix documentary, the 13th, right?
Yeah.
So good. So
Yeah,
if
we highly
anybody
recommend that.
Yes, it's such a good one. And I felt like when I watched it, I was like, oh my God, I watched it with my husband. So he's like, what? I didn't know that. And I'm like, so when I read everything, I was like, yes, like it made so much more sense.
And there's so many more other documentaries that Netflix does suggest. So, everybody check on those.
Yeah.
It helps
And
out to understand
so
everything.
I recommended the 13th because its focus was the criminal justice system.
Mhm.
But I think, what was it? Amazon, the uncomfortable truth was really good too. It kind of challenges you to look at, okay, this is the truth, unfortunately, but it is. So I'm glad we're doing this. It's been hard for me too to kind of find time. I don't know, kind of like trying to struggling to find my 4 pages a day.
Yeah.
So I've been kind of going with the like, oh, I have like 20 this week,
Yeah.
But getting it done. And it's good because this section, I think a lot of it, we were like, wait a second, this book was written when? 10 years ago? Wait, okay, now I get why the case with Breonna Taylor is so important. The case with George Floyd, like, we're now seeing this eruption.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, this
has been happening.
It's been happening, and we get to see
It's
that
not
now.
new. Yeah.
Definitely. So,
And we're learning. This is a learning thing for everybody, even though, Jess has majored in history. It's still like a learning thing for everybody. I think we've had a friend reach out and, tell us a little bit more info on things that we didn't know, which is great because this is the place where we're all here to learn and take feedback and just not criticize anybody.
Yeah, it's a no judgment, no criticize zone. This is a safe place for people that want to learn and that want to share their insight. And, that's what we're all about. This is why we have this book club, to learn from each other and help one another understand things.
Definitely.
Start discussions.
And it's interesting because, so originally my major was history and I switched, but one comment that one of our readers had, one of our amigas, was like, Jessica, that's not how it happened. And I said, you know what? Honestly, I learned this in a poli-sci class. And what she said was, unfortunately, it's very Anglo-Saxon version of everything, right? Which what we've said before is Black history should be part of the American history curriculum.
Right.
And
it should be a class on its own.
Yeah, and so some of the things that we were like, oh, yeah, okay, my bad. Like, that was an inaccurate statement. It was because I come from, Anglo-Saxon American white curriculums, right? Education system. So it's good. Everyone, please share your thoughts. Let us know what you feel. And, if we get something wrong.
Yeah, we're learning along the way with you. And if you know more, then teach us.
Yeah, and I know, like, I was doing the audio and the ebook, but I just wasn't vibing with it. And so I'm the type that I like to write things down, highlight, like tabs, everything. So I had to print it out and just, go that route because I feel more comfortable.
Behind. I'm on ebook, but trust me, like they keeps pushing it off. I had it for like July, now it's in August, so Like, I'm still gonna just add it to my book club.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay, so this section, we're going to be going over pages 58 through 141, right? So basically chapters 2 to 4, which was really cool that it actually, you know, we do 4 pages a day, but it actually landed us on the chapters, which
which I love.
Yeah.
She's like, I know you want me to be at a certain page, but what chapter?
But I must say, for this book, the 4 pages a day is how to keep up.
Oh, yeah,
'Cause
definitely.
It's a lot, especially because I'm really treating this like a textbook.
Yes.
Where it's like, I got to be committed. Before I used to be like, oh, on my downtime, on my me time. Now it's like, no, because when we do these podcasts.
Like a study.
Right. And when we do these podcasts, I really want our amigas that if they didn't read it or they want to get information on the book, that we at least know our ish that we read, right? Like, we don't want to sound dumb, although, you know, it's okay. But we want to know at least what we read, and we can semi-summarize some parts of it.
Yeah. Okay. So as we get started, so basically we get to where the root of our current problem. Obviously not the root of everything, because we've already talked about that in the last podcast. But the root of our current issues, which is the war on drugs, right? Originally, the war on drugs sounds like this great thing, right? Because it's like this idea of, oh, we're going to fight drugs. Like, who doesn't want that, right?
Stop
We're all moms. We don't want our kids being exposed to
get rid
this.
of drugs.
Yeah, right? But the goal supposedly was to target these kingpins, right? What do we think of when we think drug dealers, right?
The big narcos.
Yes, like we're like, oh, well, I just watched the whole thing on El Chapo or, or
Pablo Escobar.
Or, you know, like these big time kingpins. And that's kind of how it started. They sold us on this idea that we were going to be fighting these big kingpins, when in reality, it did not turn out that way, right?
Not even close. No, they didn't even hurt them.
Going into, you know, small little towns and poverty, and people that were just looking, you know, people that were just black and Mexican and just suspicious looking.
Whole other communities.
And that's the thing, when they say suspicious looking, we're learning that suspicious looking just means black or Latino.
Yeah, Mexican, yeah.
Right? It doesn't mean like, oh, the person had a gun, the person had, like, was driving this beautiful Bentley and, you know, I don't know, cash was falling out the window. Like, literally, it ended up translating to petty crimes, right? So that's kind of where we get started with this whole war on war on drugs. And we kind of get sold on this idea. And so we start looking at how we got fed this lie, when at the end of the day, 80% of the growth in drug arrests were actually related to just marijuana.
The smallest thing, and something that is already legal.
Yeah.
Nowadays. That's crazy.
True.
They were just being, you know, small amounts, right?
Yeah. And so from there, we kind of start seeing how this is evolving and how much power they started giving to the police.
Yeah, they started funding them also, giving them more things to go after people.
Yeah, or they started doing the 3-strike rule.
Yeah. So then they started moving towards like, okay, we're going to have a set amount of laws towards things. And then they do, okay, 3-strike rule. Like, it sounds like a reasonable thing, right? But to end up in prison for the rest of your life because you shoplifted a Twinkie?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like little things that it's...
Like they started good, but ended completely wrong.
Yeah.
Like, okay,
It's like a cycle, you know?
Yeah.
Just kept circulating.
Yeah. So I think, so we get into kind of the Fourth Amendment. And the Fourth Amendment is really important to a lot of this, especially when we look at the case of like Breonna Taylor in the future, which is cool because a lot of this we start relating it to what's going on now, right?
Yeah.
And so the Fourth Amendment says that it is the right of people to secure in their person's house papers and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause suspected by oath of affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or things to be seized. So the Fourth Amendment is supposed to protect us from cops just coming into our property, whether it's our car, whether it's our
home.
house, whether it's, you know, our own person. It's supposed to protect us because originally the purpose of the U.S. was to get away from this type of treatment and tyranny that was going on in Europe.
Yeah.
Right? So this law in itself tells us so much about what's going on.
So how they break people's rights brings me to this scripture here on page 65, poor excuse. It's the so-called consent searches have made it possible for the police to stop and search for drugs just about anybody walking down the street. All a police officer has to do in order to conduct a baseless drug investigation is ask to speak with someone and then get their consent to be searched.
And so it's interesting, consent.
Yeah, that is the main word right there.
Because if a cop tells me, can I search your car? If I say no, I look suspicious. So I'm obviously going to say, oh, yeah, go for it, right?
Yeah.
So how often do you think people actually say no?
Right. Yeah, the simple question here in the book says, may I speak to you? Like, of course you can. What you want, fool?
Yeah, like
what did I do?
Yeah, you don't think that just by saying yeah,
Is
you've already opened yourself up for all of these things that can happen.
Yeah.
Right? So then we get into like the stop and frisk where they just had the right to pull over anyone that looked suspicious.
Yeah.
Right? And in New York, this was really a problem. So the mayor of New York really fought to do stop and frisk. And they said it reduced rates of crime, but at the same time, what types of crimes? Right? It was petty crimes. Like we said, they're not getting kingpins.
Yeah.
Right? They're getting like people that are carrying a joint, people that might have a history of arrest, and that's how they end up so much in the system.
I've stolen a Twinkie.
So what is
Small
suspicious?
things.
Looks suspicious. Like what did, like that was the thing, right?
That starts into the racial profiling.
Yeah, right. Who looks suspicious? What does suspicious mean? And what we find is that suspicious means Black or Latino.
Right. Yeah, the majority that they were arresting and pulling over were Latinos and Black people.
Yeah.
And it's a drug on war, right? I mean, a war on drugs. And you're just like, okay, so does that mean that these people use more drugs than white people? But then when they did the studies, white people use more drugs than Blacks and Hispanics or Latinos.
Yeah.
Right, and I read that they're saying, you know, and these white people, they're not going into the Black communities to get the drugs.
Yeah.
Clearly, they weren't going to do that. They weren't going to go to the project or the poor community. So they were getting it from another source, from other white people.
Yeah.
But they weren't getting pulled over.
From the kingpins.
Exactly, right? When they think kingpins, they're not looking at these white communities. And it's like, well, you have frat parties, like fraternity rich white kids that are all types of drugs. How often do they get raided? And you try to throw a party in a Hispanic or Latino or Black community, how quickly do the cops show up?
Right away.
Right?
They
so
hear
it's
music, see a bunch of cars, anything suspicious.
True.
Yeah. So, you know, one judge did say, you know, if we continue this practice, we're going to have a totalitarian regime. And that's like a regime where you have a dictatorship, right? And as we start looking at this, we start moving towards breaking more rights, right? It's like, okay, so I can pull over whoever I want. I can stop and frisk whoever I want.
Yep.
I can go to anyone's house.
And they start breaking into, well, not breaking in, but they started the SWAT. They started the SWAT and just, you know, going into people's homes for very small things. Sometimes it was just, you know, a person, a witness, and sometimes a witness was even wrong, or, you know, it was, they were lying. And that brings us into Breonna Taylor's case, you know.
That's exactly what happened to her.
Yeah, the one in this book is also, you know, really sad. It was an older lady, right, Jess?
Yeah. So, you know, SWAT team, when we think SWAT team and we think of movies, it's like a hostage situation or a really intense case. And it's like, no, it's the war on drugs, so now you have to go serve these warrants, right?
Yeah.
And with Breonna Taylor, it was a no-knock warrant, which means they never had to knock on the door. They just had to break in. Right? And so they break in, and obviously you don't know who broke into your house, and you have a weapon because you have the right to carry an arm in that state, and you shoot. What happens? They start shooting excessively, and then she dies.
Without even getting in there to find out, if they're right with the correct person, or they're, there's really a crime in there. Nothing. They don't find out until everybody's dead.
Yeah. And the sad thing with this little old lady in the book that they talk about is, at this point, we start seeing how they start really militarizing our cops, right? And so they start giving them all these weapons. So what happened is that they threw a grenade in this old woman's apartment.
Yeah, gave her a heart attack.
And gave her a heart attack. And the worst part is, it was found to be homicide, but no one went to jail. And what's going on with Breonna Taylor?
Yeah, it's a homicide, but nobody has gone to jail.
No. Right? So we keep moving through like the system, and we're like, okay, how is this happening? Like, how are they targeting these people? And then you get more into, okay, so now they have the right to go into your house, raid it. They can stop you. They can take whatever they want from your home, right? That was crazy to hear that they could actually keep the money they take from drug dealers.
Yeah, their possessions, like boats, houses, everything. So that gave them even more of a right to just say, hey, let's just go into this person that's, pretty wealthy, because they must be a kingpin or something.
Yeah.
And they'll find the smallest thing and then just seize everything.
Yeah, it's intense, right? And then they're like, okay, so let's come up with a minimum sentencing. And when they come up with minimum sentencing, who is this going to affect the most, right? We get into really hard sentencing, where they're giving
the 3-strike rule.
Right. Yeah. So the 3-strike rule sounds like a good idea, right? Like, if you've committed 3 really heinous crimes, then you should get life in prison, right? But if your 3rd strike is stealing a Twinkie,
it's like, come on, you're broke, you want to feed your family, and you're stealing for certain reasons sometimes, and it's like not fair to just know that it's your 3rd strike and you have to take that much time.
Yeah, can you imagine like just shoplifting and you get life in prison?
Yeah.
And it's crazy because like if you think about it, right?
Like George Floyd also.
George Floyd, it was a $20. It was
a wrong bill or a check, or is it a bad check?
No, it was a bad 20.
Oh.
Like the 20 looked fake or something.
Something like that.
And so we get into these cases, and it's like, how is this permitted, right? And it's just because it sounds good, right? It sounds like we're fighting illegal drugs, and we're going to give you this sentence that's, going to make sure to keep you off the streets. But it's really targeting, blacks and Latinos, and realistically, like, the disproportion, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, if these people are in jail their whole lives, what reform are they really learning? How are they getting better? Like, how is prison even helping? Right?
Yeah, it's not changing.
No.
It's only, making it worse for people to continue their life or try to do better or anything. I mean, try to just have a better law than what they had before.
Yeah. And, like, the way that they decide who they stop, the way that they decide who they're going to be frisking and who they're going to give the 3 strikes rule to, it's up to the cop. It's up to his discretion.
And that was all racism.
Yeah.
That's what it was based on.
Yeah, because it's like, oh, this person looks suspicious. Well, what was so suspicious about them other than the fact that they're black or Latino? Right?
The color, what they were wearing. At times I remember back then my mom would always tell my brother, don't put on those baggy jeans, don't shave your head. And that was all because he was going to get racially profiled, just stopped walking on the street or driving.
Yeah, and it's sad because after Zimmerman, it was a 14-year-old child, so now black kids can't wear hoodies.
Right. Yeah.
Like, how can you be a black teenager? How can you tell any teenager
not to wear a hoodie?
You can't wear a hoodie? Like, I can never get my child to stop wearing hoodies.
Yeah.
And it's really sad to say that, well, you're black, you can't wear a hoodie. Like, that's what makes you suspicious. That's what makes you a threat.
Yeah, a hoodie.
A hoodie.
It's ridiculous.
So with all this, I was really surprised on how many innocent people plead guilty. Like, that's huge. That's chapter 3.
Yeah, that is crazy how much, people would just take pleas to not be stuck in jail.
I mean,
wanting to just get out.
It's unreasonable, right? Like, how am I going to be in jail for 3 years waiting to be told that I'm not guilty?
Yeah.
Right.
Or
So
that one case also, that it went, I think, 8 years. The mom couldn't help him out, and then finally she did, which was like $500 to help him out. Gets him out, and like it was like dismissed or something because the people died, so they couldn't even testify against him.
Yeah.
yeah. In the book, it talks about a lady. Her name is Emma, and it really broke down on the main reason why there's a lot of people homeless. Like, she was involved in a part of a drug sweep, but she was still innocent. She got arrested, and she wasn't going to get trial until months later. She had 2 kids at home, and so obviously her priority as a mother is trying to get home to her kids. So the easiest thing for her was like to plead guilty and deal with it later and go home to her kids. Mind you, at that time, foster people already have her kids.
They already have them in the system.
Yeah, they already have it in the system. And then it's like she's left with nothing, and then she's homeless. And she still loses her job. She's a felon already, because you're obviously
pleaded guilty.
She pleaded guilty. So it's like, what the heck? And she's still stuck with all these fees.
Yeah. And so that's the hard part, just trying to trying to get yourself out, trying to prove your innocence, right? What's the point of proving that you're innocent if you have to lose 3 to 5 years of your life to prove it, right? It's not like you get to be at home. And then, like you said, right now she's considered a felon. So one of the big things that the book really touches on is the fact that the prison itself isn't the only problem, right? It's like when you get out, you are now in this class system where you are completely shunned out, right? It's hard for you to get jobs. And then you're not guilty, and now you're back in the world, but that's still your title. And so it's hard to get jobs. It's hard to get housing. It's really hard to have that leg up. So just the label of prison or the label of felon really holds you back, right?
Yeah. Did you guys watch the 13th documentary?
I haven't finished it.
So in that documentary, it brought up a story of a boy, same scenario, that he didn't want to plead guilty. He refused, and I think he was in jail for years, right?
Yeah, and he went through so much abuse in jail.
Right.
Because you're putting innocent people in jail with people that might have committed crimes, right?
Right, and it's just like that fucks up with your mental health so much. And yeah, pretty much he came out of jail and committed suicide.
Oh, how sad is that?
Yeah, because he couldn't take it. And so then we get into our legal system and how does this happen, right? And so the first thing that we see is the issue with policing, right? But then once they're in the system, like what happens next, right? And so that's kind of where this discrimination continues, right? The way the laws are written. So then she goes into kind of explaining the process, right? So they get arrested, they get put in jail, and then there's a prosecutor.
Yeah.
And she talks about, which I did not know, how the prosecutor is the person that holds the most power, right? Mm-hmm. Because they get to decide whether the charges being held against this person are legitimate. Mm-hmm. And the sad thing is that the whole thing says that it's up to their discretion.
Wow.
So if you have someone who has a bias or who has a history against certain groups of people, it's up to their discretion, and they have the right to keep people in jail based on legal accusations that might not be true.
Yeah.
Right. And then we get into how some of these laws continue to be in practice, right? They've gone all the way to the Supreme Court, and they continue to be thought of as legal. Because the second that they say it's not legal, then they have to go back and look at so many cases that were not legal.
Everything, let people out.
Mm-hmm. one thing that they talk about, which is kind of how this system gets implemented in our brains, and um, as a therapist, I talk about this a lot, and it's the unconscious bias, right? So some people are like, well, I'm not racist. But a lot of us, I'm not going to exclude myself, right? We have racist tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
And they're unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know this. So she goes through this experiment of, she talks about a study where they told everyone to close their eyes and picture a criminal.
Yeah. What do you picture?
What do you picture? And most people pictured a black person.
Yeah.
And they said, now close your eyes and picture a drug addict. And most people picture a black person. And then they said a drug dealer, and they pictured a black person, right? And there's this unconscious bias. You don't even realize it. And she talks a lot in the book about the media, right? How constantly every time we see a criminal, it's a black person. Mm-hmm. And even the words they use, they show a white rapist, right? That guy that raped that girl at a college campus behind like trash cans. Mm-hmm. And when they posted his picture, they picked a picture of him in a suit in college, and they highlighted all the good things about him.
Wow.
And when they show a black person who was killed,
it's like
let me tell you all the
bad
things. The mugshot. Yeah, like what does his mugshot have to do with this incident, right? And so it creates this bias, and that takes us to a bias in the law. She talks about how they pick jurors, right? And if a lawyer's like, oh, no, this person can't be on the jury because of his hair, then he's not on the jury. But because she didn't say it's because he's black, it's not racist. It's not discrimination. Right? And then they get placed in the system. And then if the judge rules a sentence of like 20 years, right? They talk about the difference between a sentence of carrying 5 grams of coke or carrying 5 grams of crack. Mm-hmm. They both are coke. It's just 2 different forms of coke. Right? And then the person carrying the coke gets 5 years, and the person carrying the crack gets 10. Mm-hmm. Because coke is usually used by white people. Right.
Wow.
Right. But
so they adjust it to where it's going to benefit the white.
And if the judge doesn't say, I am ruling this way because this person's black, then it wasn't racist. Yeah. And the Supreme Court has upheld this so many times. And then we get to the part at the end of chapter 3 where really we understand what happened with George Floyd. Mm-hmm. Right? At the end, we see that the law is written so that cops have these rights. And so they talk about this guy who was pulled over. He was driving to work in the morning, and apparently he was pulled over for a broken taillight. Mm-hmm. And when he gets pulled over, the cop puts him in a chokehold. He passes out. He's full of urine and feces when he wakes up. So he's so mad, right? So he sues. And the case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And they said that chokeholds were not illegal. And because he said chokeholds are not illegal, that's why it was legal for what happened to George Floyd.
Wow. And it just gets pushed to be used more and more.
Yeah. And it luckily they just passed a law that's going to make it illegal to do chokeholds. But I think what I'm loving about the book is it's telling us the framework and the history of why we are at this point now. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. And so now we know where we are, and I think that it's things that we need to know. Right.
We need to start teaching the younger kids that are barely learning about this, that don't know, and then people that are our age that still don't know.
Yeah. Because we see all these protests, we see all these things going on. You know, you hear things like defund the police. Yeah. And everybody thinks, oh my God, but we need cops. Mm-hmm. It's like, do you know what cops are doing? Yeah. Do cops really need the weapons that they have? Yeah, right?
They need better training.
Yeah. Do they need a tank? Mm-hmm. Right? And so when we think about it, like, do they need a tank? So when we think about that, right, and defunding them, would mean let's just take away their tanks and let's put that money into education.
Yeah.
Let's change laws so that people don't get 20 years in jail for a petty crime or life in jail, right? So I'm glad we're reading this. Excited to see the rest.
Yes, it is really exciting. Let's keep reading and, keep the discussions going because it's getting deeper.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. All right. So comment, like, share, and, subscribe.
Everything. Bye.
Bye, amigas.